This is a clip from one of our recent live streams. We stream live every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. As a reminder, this is our second channel, Fish the Moment Live. Our main channel, Fish the Moment, is where we have all of our highly edited YouTube content. We spend 30 to 40 hours a week producing one YouTube video that's posted on the Fish the Moment channel every Friday at 7 a.m. Central Standard Time. These videos include on-the-water footage of us actually fishing, as well as detailed instruction on how to use electronics, fish offshore, and a lot of other great information. Make sure to check out the Fish the Moment channel if you enjoy the content on this channel. What it takes to actually start offshore fishing, and there's a lot of different ways you can get into it. There's a lot of info out there already. One of the biggest misconceptions I hear from guys is that you have to have a high dollar fish finder, live scope, 360 imaging, and all this stuff to catch fish offshore, which is the furthest thing from the truth. And I know you talk about that a lot, Randy, and sometimes I'm like, man, Randy, you make it sound like you need to have $30,000 of electronics to compete. You can catch tons of fish offshore without all that stuff. And if you watch most of my YouTube videos, guys, I was actually running an old Humminbird Onyx unit or Humminbird 998 that was like 10 years old, 8 years old for the majority of my channel up to like 6 months ago. And all my recordings I use on my channel, a lot of them are still from that old Humminbird. And I go out with guys all the time for fishing lessons, and they have units, for example, like this Hook 5 or this Hook 7 from Lowrance. This is a $600 fish finder at the most. You can get the triple shot, you can get it with the mapping, but you can just get for $500 you can get a fish finder that gives you down imaging, side imaging, 2D sonar. I've even gone out with guys that have the Hook 5 and they just have the split shot, so they don't even have side imaging, don't even have side imaging, just down imaging and 2D sonar. This unit is $299, and I did a lesson last year, Randy, with a guy on Lake Ouachita, and I hadn't been to Lake Ouachita in like 3 years. So we went out in the lake, went fishing. He had this unit on the boat, and he's like, show me how to catch fish. And using this unit, I was able to quickly find us a school of bass suspended in some standing timber. We caught like 15 fish, and we went around the lake and patterned it and caught like 25 to 30 fish using a X split shot Lowrance $300 unit. Not because I had the fanciest equipment or anything on the boat. It's because when we went to Lake Ouachita, I understood not only how to read the fish finder, but I also understood to an extent where the fish should be setting up based on seasonal patterns, based on my experience on the water. I knew that fish were going to be moving out to secondary points. They were going to be setting up on some of these humps and these longer points. And I was able to go graph those with an inexpensive fish finder and find a ton of fish and catch a bunch of fish. Now, the reason I'm able to do that is not because of my equipment, it's because of the time I've spent on the water. I've spent probably, I would estimate 3,000 hours studying, implementing, and trying to learn offshore bass fishing over the past 10 years. And if you want to know how many hours 3,000 hours is in terms of days, if we divide that by 24, that means I've spent 125 days of my life just dedicated to offshore bass fishing. And that's probably a low ball. That's more like on the water, just learning, stuff like that. And that's like full days. So that's not just like, that's like 24-hour days. So that is kind of how I think about it. I've spent so many hours diving into bass behavior, understanding what's going on, so I can go out with a cheap fish finder and go catch tons of fish. I don't need live scope. I don't need anything like that. And you can still do that today. And I know you've seen me do that, Randy, on the lake. You've seen me go out with my old fish finders. You've been in the boat with me, and I've been able to catch tons of fish. So that's one thing I want to dispel right this minute is you don't need a ton of equipment. I mean, I run an 18-foot Triton that's a 2005 Triton. It's an old Triton. It's not like I have a brand new boat. I'm not running the craziest electronics. Even right now, I'm running a Humminbird Helix 9, a $1,000 fish finder, and I can find plenty of fish with just that. You don't need $10,000 worth of electronics. What you need to know, though, is how to actually use the electronics and interpret them, and that's what takes the time. It's not the money investment, I feel like, that's the biggest barrier for offshore fishing. It's the fact that you need to spend hours and days and months of time learning how to do it, just like anything. What are your thoughts, Andy?
Yeah, I remember up until just like 3 or 4 months ago, Johnny had like his electronics were like 7 or 8 years old that he had on his boat. I mean, these things were like antiques. And I think one of the big keys on this, Johnny, is that and not only do you know how to interpret and read the electronics, but I think it's very important to understand how to set your electronics up to get the right readings. Because I know I just wasn't getting the definition even on my 2D, and you told me some stuff about how to change the settings, and it really made a big difference. So I think one of the biggest areas of instruction that a lot of people need to learn is simply how to set their units up to maximize the detail of it. Because I think so many people, when they get a unit, they don't really know what they're doing as far as how they need to set it up, or they don't know what they're looking at, and they rely on the automatic settings. And you can get by with those automatic settings, but when you're talking about being able to discern like bait fish and fish next to structure and the subtle things that really separate people like yourself from just somebody that's actually just tries to catch them offshore, understanding how to set those units up is key. And I know that you got some videos out on that. I mean, they're well worth the time checking them out.
And this is kind of how I think about it, Randy, and I don't know if this is a good analogy, but like the way I think about it is that if, let's say you give someone, you put someone in an airplane and they have to go fly an airplane. You can't expect someone to be able to go fly in a small aircraft, just jump in one, fly across safely to a landing strip and go land somewhere. You're going to crash, you're going to hit something, nothing's going to go right there. You need to learn all the instruments, how to set everything, how to deal with the wind, the crosswinds. I don't know enough about flying, so I don't really even know. But like, if you think about guys who fly commercial planes, they have to put thousands of hours in flight training to be able to take anyone on a passenger to like be good enough to do it. That's how it's like with offshore fishing, where you have to learn the equipment, you have to learn all the other factors. You can't just jump into a boat with a fish finder and just start catching them offshore. If you enjoy our videos and want more in-depth instruction about bass fishing, check out our virtual seminars on fishthemoment.com. On our virtual seminars page, you'll see all of our upcoming live seminars, including our advanced summer jig fishing seminar focused on both offshore and shallow jig fishing. Randy and I will give you our best secrets in terms of bait modifications, areas, retrieves, and a lot of other great information. You can also find recordings of our past seminars. We'll be updating our library every single week with past seminars that will help you become a better bass fisherman. Check them out on fishthemoment.com. You can luck into it a little bit here and there, which is always good to build your confidence. One thing about shallow water fishing is you can luck into fish a little bit easier. And that's what I call it. A lot of guys who catch fish up shallow, they are literally lucking into their fish. They're not intentionally catching fish by going from one spot to another, or they don't know why the fish are there. They just happen to pull up on a bank, cast out there, and they happen to get a bite just because you hit the fish in the face, basically. And I feel like with offshore fishing, it takes a lot more intentional understanding of what you're doing to catch those bass. Because when I'm coming out here on a spot on Lake Washita, yeah, you could potentially, if the fish are active on a bank, you could roll down one of these banks with a jerk bait or an Alabama rig or a spinner bait and catch some fish. But it's a lot harder to catch fish off the tip of a point when they're on a spot the size of your boat, and you need to make sure you actually make the proper cast, you're using the right retrieve, you know the fish are there. You have to be intentional about it. You can't just luck into them. You can luck into them at times, but it's much harder to do that, especially when you're having a lot of guys who actually know what they're doing. So you have to put in that effort and that time to learn it. And I think just a lot of guys aren't willing to put in the time. And honestly, Randy, like for yourself, if you were going to become an offshore angler and like dedicate yourself to that, you probably would need to put in, I would expect, about 500 hours on the water with your electronics and just learning bass behavior in all your different lakes, on a TVA lake, on a highland reservoir, lowland reservoir. If you're going to go fish the tour, you have to put all this time learning where the fish set up, where they're positioned. Like, for example, we were talking on Pickwick when you were out there, and like a lot of guys were catching them offshore on Pickwick. And I was saying, hey, they're probably going to be on their first ledges where they pull off on shell beds and like 10 to 15 feet of water. Well, if I told you that, you probably still may have not been able to go out there and find those fish because very few guys found them, but that's how the tournament got won. And the reason they knew how to find them is because, one, they had the electronics, they understood where the bass behavior was, and I feel like if I was there, I probably could have found those fish relatively easily because I've done that on countless lakes around this area, versus you can tell someone, go fish ledges in 15 feet of water, and this is what to look for, but you still have to have all the knowledge accumulated to be able to put that into practice, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's hard to catch other people's fish, and I'll use an example here that I think a lot of guys can relate to. Let's talk about some of the experiences I had fishing bull shoals and table rock this past winter during the Fish the Moment on the Water lessons. In the last winter, there was everybody out there. If you went to bull shoals or table rock, they were just out in the middle of the creeks, out in the middle of the lake, looking at live scope. They weren't even. They could have literally you could have put a tent around their boat where they couldn't have seen anything around them, and they would have caught just as many fish because they were completely focused on that live scope.
Thanks for checking out the video. If you made it this far, we'd really appreciate if you left a like on the video. It helps us out with the YouTube algorithm and gets these videos out to more people. Also consider subscribing. It's free and it lets you get notifications of every single one of our videos that we upload daily. Finally, remember to check out the main Fish the Moment channel, where we actually have on-the-water fishing footage as well as detailed graphics on electronics, offshore fishing, bass behavior, and a lot of other great information. Thanks for checking out the video, and we'll see you on the next one.